Chapter 14. A Lost Raven. Hariel. The staggering number of things Hariel and Hagrid adjusted to simply to survive from day to day in Westeros were uncountable. There were constantly new things popping up, words to use, strange objects, practices or traditions lurking around every damn corner, just waiting to take them off guard. After several years, they were past the largest bumps in the road though. Those bewildering moments of misunderstood confusion grew further apart. Until Hariel one day woke up and didn't even blink when Elisa passed by in the hallway, carrying a washing basin, because there were no accompanying thoughts about how life was so much easier when everyone had access to indoor plumbing. Though Hagrid had actually found his old Muggle Studies textbook, and Princess Rhaenyra had made Maester Geraldis analyze it, the book only covered overall concept descriptions, lacking detailed explanations. But Geraldis wasn't stupid and was basing a whole new study from the drawings and shallow summaries. But the biggest thing to adjust to, and which Hariel had yet to truly grasp, was actually how the seasons worked, since they were absolutely messed up. Even if they'd wanted to understand them, they wouldn't have had a chance to, because even after several years in this world, Hariel and Hagrid still hadn't experienced all 4 seasons. In this world, a season could last a few months, or 10 years, and no one knew exactly how long anything would last. This appeared pleasant when it seemed as if summer never ended, when food production was possible, hunting easily accessible and the temperatures manageable. But absolute hell on earth when winter never stopped. It was the reason the words of House Stark were, "Winter is coming." It served as both a warning and reminder, because one better start preparing for winter early or you wouldn't live to see spring. Hariel honestly had no idea how they did it, and wasn't looking forward to learning it in the future. How could anyone survive a decade with no summer? Wasn't that like surviving on the North Pole? Hariel and Hagrid hadn't known it at the time, but they had arrived in Essos when it was early spring, and it lasted over 2 years, before summer came around and lingered for another couple of years. Hariel had begun feeling the slight chill in the wind, and mention of winter was becoming more and more frequent. Food was stockpiled, crops laid aside, firewood was collected, some even by ship. They never knew for sure how long any season would last, but the weather was tracked and calculated by the Order of Maesters, who sent missives to all the great houses of Westeros whenever a season changed. And only a few months before a white raven arrived from Old Town with the announcement that winter was coming, Hariel was busy climbing up onto Norbert's back, her heart beating a marathon within her chest in anticipation of her first flight on Dragonback. "You're sure you've secured the straps?" Hagrid called, fluttering nervously around Norbert doing last-minute checks. Hariel reached once again to check the seatbelt. In addition to the dragon saddle made by Hagrid, it was hooped like a belt around her waist, then strapped tightly down to the seat so she wouldn't get thrown off Norbert whenever she did a sharp turn. The dragon saddle wasn't like that of a horse, because it was impossible to sit comfortably on a dragon. The dragon's powerfully wide backs made it so her legs had nowhere natural to fall, and it became practically impossible to straddle their backs. With the massive sizes some of the dragons grew to, it was like trying to straddle a bulky floor. It was basically flat. And how does one straddle something flat? Either she ended up having to do a full split, which was uncomfortable as hell, or she had to lie down on her stomach, neither of which were ideal. This had been a huge issue when they flew with Caraxes too, and probably why Hagrid had sworn to never get on a dragon again. To get around the issue, they fastened a big bulky seat on top of the dragon, and Hariel was actually straddling the seat alone instead of Norbert. A little like installing a chair on top of an elephant, with the added bonus of giving her a higher vantage point to see around Norbert's powerful neck, which was directly in her line of sight. "It's secure!" she said, tugging hard on the strap to show it was secure, both for Hagrid's sake as much as her own. Norbert shifted impatiently underneath her. The blue dragon was only 4 years old, but already nearing the same size as Princess Rhaenyra's dragon Syrax, which was 26. Since Norbert had been growing like an Engorgio charm left unchecked, she'd actually been deemed big enough to fly for a while, but he hadn't been as confident in her strength. Just because someone was tall didn't mean they were strong, and Norbert needed years of strengthening her muscles before anyone deemed it safe for her to carry a person. This was actually not the first time Hariel had straddled Norbert, but she'd never flown before. The other tests had been done indoors in places it was impossible for Norbert to take off, just so they could see how she'd react to having a human on her back. The tests had gone well, mostly, but today was the first time Ariel climbed into the saddle while under the open sky. "Are you ready?" Damon shouted from atop Caraxes. He'd be flying with her today. If she fell, there wasn't really anything he could do, but the prince could run interference if Norbert decided to fly, of course. Ariel swallowed, leaned forwards, and asked Norbert the same question. "Are you ready to fly?" "Yes, yes, I will fly to Driftmark. I will show you the way, sister," Norbert said insistently, almost reverberating with excitement. They'd been talking about flying together for years. By now, Norbert anticipated flying together as much as Ariel. Well, here went nothing. She'd soon be flying or dead. "Fly, Norbert!" Norbert stood up, fanned out her great wings and started beating them hard against her sides. Ariel clutched tighter to the handles, leaned forwards and locked her body. Norbert took off, lifting first slowly to the air, working to gain altitude, before accelerating. It had been remarked about before by many others, but Norbert was fast. Both how swiftly she accelerated and her top speed. "Fly!" Norbert cried. Ariel squinted, holding on for dear life as Norbert arced up, up, nearly going vertical. They'd only just skirted the bottom of the clouds when Norbert did a U-turn. Coiling down and pointing her snout back towards the earth, they plummeted, making it feel as if she was strapped to the most jarring roller coaster, and Ariel's shrieks turned to laughter. The wind whipping her face was really cold, but she was wearing her warmest coat. Earmuffs, scarves, gloves, and Norbert's body radiated a lot of heat, warming up the saddle like a seat warmer. Norbert straightened up to soar straight ahead. The water passed by underneath when Caraxes appeared above them. Ariel craned her neck but couldn't quite see Damon from their position. "Fly!" Norbert repeated, her muscles coiling in preparation, and next she shot off at full speed, overtaking Caraxes and storming ahead. Between adjusting to the beating wings, the bone-rattling jostling and harsh air hitting her face, all Ariel could do was cling tight as Norbert speeded ahead like a little fighter jet, next to Caraxes' commercial Airbus. In no time, they landed on Driftmark on the flat sandy beach outside of the high tide castle. Caraxes landing not far away. Ariel couldn't stop smiling, and when she saw Damon turn in his saddle, she finally dared taking her hands off the handles, giving him 2 thumbs up while grinning like an idiot. "Where do we fly next?" After that, the damage was done. The first couple of weeks she flew with Norbert each day, completely neglecting her music, culture, arithmetic, geometry, sewing, language and history lessons. Best of all, she was encouraged to do so. Dragon riding needed to be practiced as thoroughly as horse riding or Quidditch, and as the newest dragon rider they didn't want Ariel to fall to her death or lose control of Norbert. So Ariel would probably have been flying more if she could, but the biggest obstacle was getting someone to supervise. She'd gone flying with Damon between the islands, travelled alongside the coast with Lenor and Princess Rhaenyra for a trip to King's Landing. But Ariel's appetite for flying was much greater than theirs. They'd been dragon riders for years and the novelty had faded a bit. "Ariel is a natural," Lenor said to his wife after Ariel had come down for breakfast and asked if someone were available. Though several of them had time, none of them were in the mood. It was raining. "Perhaps she can go alone. Lady Ariel has been in control of Norbert every flight for a fortnight now," Lenor said. How could she ever have thought badly of Lenor? Ariel had no idea what had possessed her before. Clearly Lenor was the most sensible person in the castle. "A fortnight is not long. I spent several months flying under my uncle's supervision before my father allowed me to fly Cyrex alone," Princess Rhaenyra answered thoughtfully. "You were 7. By the time you were 4 and 10 you'd been flying alone for years, and Lady Ariel has demonstrated she's able to control Norbert in the air." The princess agreed with her husband, and Ariel rushed off at once in excitement at being given leave to fly on her own. Almost alone. Of course Norbert was there too, and they were going to exploit it for all it was worth. Ariel began her solo trips flying to King's Landing. It was far enough away it counted as a solo trip, but not so far away she couldn't make it back to Dragonstone within a day. Upon arriving at the capital, she circled the city a couple times, and headed back without visiting the royals at the castle. It wouldn't be feasible since they didn't allow for free roaming dragons in King's Landing. The only flying dragons were being ridden, and Norbert had never been chained that way. She still made the trip several times, and Ariel believed she waved to Queen Alicent on the balcony once when flying by. At least it had been someone wearing a lot of green. During one of these trips, Ariel and Norbert came across Aegon and Helena while they were out with their dragons too. Ariel had flown alongside Caraxes, Cyrex and Seasmoke before, but it had been exhilarating to join the new dragons. "Keep calm! They are friends!" Ariel shouted, and took Norbert's tilt of the head as a sign she'd heard. Being complete strangers, there was a tense standoff where the three dragons began circling each other above the mount of the Blackwater Rush. But once Dreamfire, the biggest and oldest of the lot, deemed Norbert unexciting enough to ignore, things calmed down. Relieved, Ariel waved eagerly from atop Norbert. At around 90 years of age, Helena's dragon Dreamfire was huge with pale blue scales and silver markings. Norbert was under half the size of Dreamfire, and many times lighter, but she'd already caught up in the proportions of the golden dragon Sunfire who'd bonded with Aegon. The larger dragons were extremely powerful, with massive scorching fires, big jaws and powerful limbs, but they couldn't beat the younger dragons in speed and agility. And Sunfire was a young, proud and competitive soul. Ariel had heard this before, but she got a first-hand demonstration that day. Ariel had assumed that they were just goofing around, flying laps above King's Landing. But then the golden dragon started to reposition, changing from staying at a comfortable distance to flying right on their tail, Aegon laying low in the saddle for less wind resistance. Ariel reached across the saddle, knocking her closed fist against the middle of Norbert's lower neck. It was the wordless signal telling Norbert to speed up, while using her open palm to stroke the same placement to slow down. Instructions that were only possible to train Norbert to understand because Ariel could explain them, and they had agreed on the commands together. A single knock of her fist and Norbert was all too eager to prove herself. Norbert shot off, flapping her wings so frantically you'd think she was attempting to fly out of her own body. Peering over her shoulder, Ariel laughed when seeing that Sunfire and Aegon were falling behind, Dreamfire making up the tail end with Helena. And there, as a rising figure in the far distance, a third massive dragon just took flight from the beach. So the three royal siblings were out flying today, eh? Aemond came flying after them astride Vermithor, following the three forerunners as they set off towards Blackwater Bay. Within the hour, Ariel could confirm Norbert was able to outpace these three dragons if she pushed herself, but that her stamina wasn't quite there to keep top speed as long as the older dragons could, and that Vermithor could fly and chat at the same time. From "The chill has returned to the air, speaker," to "I like flying south, it gets warmer there, but my pets never want me to fly south," or "Are we flying home to Silverwing?" When Helena landed on a small uninhabited island on the Blackwater after nearly an hour of flying over the ocean, Ariel requested Norbert follow. "Is this a routinely thing, the family trips?" Ariel called up at Helena. Dreamfire shook her head, looking at Norbert as if the dragon was an annoying little bird making too much noise next to her window. "Not often, no," Helena laughed, cheeks flushed with more liveliness than Ariel had seen her exhibit on the ground. The princess loved flying too. "Congratulations on mounting Norbert, Ariel. You look free in the air." "Thank you." Ariel leaned forwards to speak with Norbert. "Will you wait for me if I unmount?" Norbert flapped her wings. "A little." "Will you tell me before you fly off so I can come with you?" Norbert rumbled. "Yes," she promised. Ariel knew the dragon meant it right now, but if something was interesting enough, she also knew Norbert would be quick to forget her promises. She unfastened her straps and climbed down from Norbert anyway. Helena didn't come down. She leant over Dreamfire, gently stroking the dragon's neck with an affectionate smile as Ariel approached so she didn't have to yell. When Vermithor soared by overhead, Dreamfire made a low growling sound, baring her teeth and glaring in the larger dragon's direction. "Stop," Princess Helena ordered suddenly. "Come no closer to Dreamfire." Ariel did as told. "Should I step back?" "No. Do not fare closer and it should be fine. Dreamfire is a solitary queen, and you are but a stranger to her, A stranger with a strange dragon. It is not safe. I understand. Ariel nodded, eyes flickering towards the stretching water where sunfire was flying low over the water's surface. May I ask why all three of you are flying though? It's a celebration of sorts, Princess Helena said. My youngest brother Daeron recently arrived from Old Town. It is his first visit in 2 years and he has not seen Vermithor before. It is a shame Daeron's dragon remains too young to fly, or he would undoubtedly have joined us. I had not heard Prince Daeron was back. Is his fostering at the High Tower with his uncle over? She had never met Prince Daeron Targaryen, or as Ariel called him in her head, the other Daeron, since she was more familiar with Sir Daeron Velaryon, who had recently been knighted by Sir Laenor the young prince. No, Daeron is only home for a visit, Helena said. My mother is overjoyed, but I expect my brother is standing on the balcony green with envy after seeing you fly northward alongside us. He is impatient to mount his dragon to Sarien, though I doubt it will be too long a wait left. There was another matter to celebrate as well, Helena said shyly, smiling right at Ariel. It was one of those rare smiles where she was able to hold eye contact without being overcome with discomfort. What happened? You know of my betrothal, how the marriage was pushed back. I do, Ariel said slowly. Helena had never spoken much about her betrothal except to confirm she was marrying Aegon, something she said with an utterly blank expression, and then added the marriage would happen as soon as I flower. Why the hell's were girl married off so young around here? It seems to be happening everywhere. Well, the princess had gotten her period at 13, yet here Helena was, 50 years old and as unmarried as Ariel. Thank Merlin. It's been broken, Helena said, her eyes dancing. What? Truly? The betrothal to Aegon has been broken? Ariel asked, unable to fight down the smile on her face. It was no secret Aegon and Helena themselves did not want to marry, but the queen had betrothed them anyway, which had struck Ariel as strange. Queen Alicent was known for being a very devout follower of the Seven, which was a religion fiercely opposed to the Targaryen practice of sibling marriages. So one thing had been if Viserys was the one to betroth his children, but apparently this had initially been pushed through by the queen, which seemed a bit hypocritical, not to mention very upsetting for Helena and Aegon. Yes, Helena said. I believe your accounts on magical heritage played a hand in this. Ariel blinked. Oh, so King Viserys read my writing on incest in Britain. Ariel had not brought it up with the king, but she had told Princess Rhaenyra about how things were done different back home. The princess had been willing to listen, but brushed off her claims that incest could be harmful to children the same way Aemond had, using several of the same words even. So Ariel mentioned this to Aemond during one of his accidental trips to Dragonstone back when he still couldn't control Vermithor. It had been meant as a "you and your sister are so alike" remark, except Aemond took offense, either because Ariel had compared his reaction to a girl, or it was their blasted sibling rivalry rearing its ugly head again. Maybe it was both. But in his rush to prove he was not like Rhaenyra, Aemond had asked her to write down how magic was inherited back in England to show to his father. Ariel had done the best she could and gotten help from Hagrid, who knew of some families that had lost their magic or started producing squibs because of inbreeding. Ariel had not dared hope her writing accounts on this would have such consequences though. Breaking a betrothal was a huge deal, and usually it wasn't something to be celebrated. Ariel looked up to where Aegon and Sunfire were doing cartwheels in the air around Vermithor and Aemond. Safe to say, neither Aegon or Helena looked too broken up about it. And Ariel hoped Aegon wasn't flying drunk again. What does this mean, Helena? Ariel asked. For you, for Prince Aegon. Rumors of his decision has been circulating for over a year, and in the last moons, several lords have seen fit to bring their daughters to court. I am not privy to my father's mind on the matter. Word will spread, and soon the missives will come from all corners of the kingdom. Autumn is waning, so mind the lost raven adrift in storms. It'll hatch eggshells, Helena said, just as Dreamfire shook her head, snorting out a few sparks of fire. They both looked at her curiously, but the dragon shook her head and then settled right back to normal. But what about yourself? I am not privy to their plans, Foremost, they are concerned with picking a suitable bride for Aegon. It will strengthen House Targaryen with a blood bond to one of the great houses, be them a lioness, a doe, or a fish. Helaena said distractedly. In time, my father will choose a suitable husband for me as well. Hariel barely held back a groan. But are you comfortable with that, Helaena? Do not have a say, she said carefully. How a king manages his burdens decides whether the realm stands or breaks, Helaena said matter-of-factly. So there's no one you would prefer? Helaena shook her head, looking perfectly content seated on her dragon, and Hariel could empathize with that. The freedom of dragon riding was amazing. Maybe a part of Hariel would always miss flying brooms, but she appreciated Norbert in a completely different and no less significant way. A dragon was a partner, a friend, and it was liberating to know there was a friend out there, perfectly willing to sweep her off her feet and fly off into the sunset when things got tough. If Hariel thought it straining to be a mere ward of a princess, she didn't want to know how it was to be an actual princess. You may not have heard of a suitor, but is there anyone you suspect they have in mind? Helaena hesitated. Maybe. It is only a rumor from long ago, though I would not mind it. Perchance it could bring peace. That was positively a glowing review from someone like Helaena though, piquing Hariel's curiosity. Who? Jacaerys. Hariel almost choked on her tongue. Helaena wanted to marry Jacaerys? But he was so young. Just a kid. You favored Jace? Hariel asked, unable to cover the incredulity in time. Oh shit. Baela would not like that. Baela was convinced she and Jacaerys were soulmates, and Hariel could easily picture this ending in some sort of Targaryen catfight. Or would it be a dragon fight? With the prince for reward. Helaena might have the bigger dragon, but the girl had next to no fighting spirit, while Baela was fierce. She was absolutely Daemon's daughter through and through, so Baela might just win that fight. My marriage will not be about love, but for the sake of those I love, Hariel. Helaena looked at her in a way she never had before, and Hariel didn't like the expression at all. It was patronizing, and made Helaena look like her mother. The princess stared down at Hariel as if she was too young and naive and just didn't get it. It made Hariel straighten, jutting out her jaw stubbornly. Who was Helaena to judge her? Of the two, which of them was the pampered princess, But he's... Hariel was blanking completely on how to explain in a way that would be fair to Helaena. By now, Hariel knew well what a political marriage was, had observed the way Rhaenyra and Laenor were friends and allies who shared a family, but little more. Hariel even suspected Rhaenyra was perfectly aware of her husband's relationship with Sir Carl. Hariel just had trouble with how accepting everyone was about forming such marriages. It wasn't like the stories she'd seen on the telly growing up, but maybe Hariel was the one with the hang-ups here. He's so Jace! You know, he used to think the moon was made out of ice and it only came out at night so the sun wouldn't melt it. Helena's lips quirked up. But maybe it is. How can anyone prove it is not so? It seems you're underestimating my flying capabilities, princess. Helaena laughed. It had been a joke, it really had. But perhaps a part of Hariel secretly believed that remark regarding her flying capabilities. And perhaps it had been too arrogant, because Hariel forgot she wasn't truly the pilot anymore, only an opinionated passenger. Lifts! Hariel commanded, huddling into her saddle uneasily when Norbert didn't heed her. Could she not hear? They were cruising along at a pace where Hariel thought Norbert would be able to hear despite the wind. Lefts! She repeated, and reached out to tap Norbert's neck with the tips of her fingers twice, which was a non-verbal command to go left, but the dragon was set on her course. Oh, come on! Hariel exclaimed, glancing down on the terrain flying by underneath them. We're flying pretty far here, Norbert! 3 months after Hariel's first flight, a white raven arrived at Dragonstone declaring winter was here. Everyone had been disappointed, but not surprised. The native dragons had steadily become more reclusive as the weather grew colder, spending more time within their warm lairs on the dragon mount rather than flying. In stark contrast, Norbert only grew more lively. The first time she saw snow, Norbert started dancing, shaking her wings, swishing her spiked tail back and forth and running around melting fragile snowflakes with fire that turned blue. A bit of an overkill, since Norbert's blue fireballs could reduce bones to ash. Is this how all dragons behave in winter back in your homeland? Rhaenyra had inquired, quite fascinated by Norbert's different reaction to the cold. No, Ariel sighed. She's just half Swedish. A bit of snow wasn't going to keep Ariel from flying either, so she dressed her warmest, packed her old school bag with her usual flying gear, climbed Norbert, and travelled into the Riverlands to see the famous Harrenhal Castle. If one took off from Dragonstone and kept a steady course flying straight west, one would pass directly over the castle. In theory, the trip was about the same length as to King's Landing, just an inland flight instead of over water. Since Harwin Strong had died from a fire within that castle, Ariel hadn't mentioned she was heading there. There were some rumors that Harwin Strong was the true father of Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey, and not Laenor. In case that was true, Ariel didn't want to bring attention to her destination. In hindsight, it would have been better if she had. The heat from Norbert's body definitely helped, but it couldn't cancel out the bitter chill of the wind. The high altitude was far colder than at ground level, and even the flying radiator under her couldn't cancel all of it out. "Come on, Norbert!" Ariel pleaded, clutching tighter, but Norbert wasn't listening. After Harrenhal, Ariel had asked Norbert to return to Dragonstone, and though Norbert hadn't agreed, she hadn't disagreed either. But she never had this problem before. Norbert could certainly be stubborn, take a little detour here and there when something interesting happened, but this wasn't that, at all. Norbert had flown too high, taking them above the clouds so Ariel lost track of the ground below. She had assumed Norbert was still going to Dragonstone though. But time passed by, and when they at last came down from the clouds, Ariel was startled by the terrain underneath them. Ariel wasn't an expert on Westerosi geography, but everything was different. She may have studied the Great Stone Table at Dragonstone, but things didn't look the same in real life as painted on a stone map. It was windy and snowing underneath the clouds, but of what she could see, the trees had different shades of greens. The grass browner, the waters darker, the stone grayer, the snow thicker. All of it was off. She did not know for sure which direction they were flying in anymore, but she had a good suspicion. Ariel asked Norbert to slow down by stroking her open palm over her neck. When that wasn't answered, she did the same motion quickly twice in a row, which meant to land. But Norbert ignored it all. They had been to see the sights Ariel had been curious about, and now it was Norbert's turn to sightsee. All Ariel could do was hold on, even as her arms went numb and her body started aching. Because unless she wanted to fall to her death, there weren't a lot of alternatives. Eventually, after hours, daylight was waning and Norbert was getting tired. They were losing altitude, flying lower and lower. They soared over a huge forest and Ariel had no idea how Norbert would even find a spot to land in such a thicket, but somehow she managed. Cold, exhausted, and her muscles aching, Ariel groaned as he landed in the forest. Ariel staggered down from the dragon, falling into thick snow that reached above her knees. The shock had her scramble for her wand, clumsy fingers reaching into her backpack so she could get rid of the worst snow and heat herself up with a bluebell fire. "Where have you brought us, Norbert?" Ariel breathed. She needed to drink as well. She was cold, but she hadn't had a drop of water since Harrenhal either, and the trip had been exhausting. "The air smells nice. Clean. Fresh." Norbert puffed out some smoke, rolling her shoulders and panting heavily. "There are deer here too. I smell them here." "You followed your nose?" Why was she even surprised? Norbert could never pass up a juicy stag for dinner. Ariel looked around, wondering how to proceed now. The snow was coming down, the sky darkening. The very air tasted different, and it wasn't just from the lack of salt from the ocean. It was more frigid here than on Dragonstone, colder than the Crownlands, Riverlands, or the Vale. It was to be expected though, because Ariel would bet her wand they were in the north.